All right, welcome. We are live in the Dads Who Lead podcast. We have a very tactical and exciting guest today. Dan Milinazzo is here. We're going to be talking about his journey with scheduling. And it sounds like a very simple thing, but he has really put this as an anchor in his life and in his game as a dad and in business. And so I'm very excited to dig into the hows and whys, and most importantly, his journey and how he's developed this part of his game as a man. And I first connected with Dan, because he had some posts online about, hey, I'm doing this scheduling program to help people out, and I asked him to come on, and I'm very humbled and excited to chat with him today. Dan, welcome on.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. So Dan you're a dad of two girls, and which part of the country are you in?
I'm in the Boston area, so Northeast New England.
Cool. So you're sitting right now with a family of four that you manage. Dan is the senior director for construction with the real estate investment trust there in the Boston area. So he's got a lot of things that he's managing and organizing. So just to have, as listeners, to have a context of the level that he's got to be able to perform at for his organizing, and talk a little bit before we get into the history of what really inspired you to level up your organizing and your scheduling skills.
A lot of it was, back in the day, I was always thinking that if I had it planned out and scheduled out, then I'd be able to, stay on task a little bit more and be less reactionary. And then the default for most people is the reactionary field, right? So it's like something comes up, you tackle it. And I just felt like some of the things I really wanted to do weren't getting done because I just didn't have time to do it. So I knew that I wanted to really focus in on that. Because I went to school for architecture, and we were known for our 24-hour charrettes, where it was right before a crit the next morning. You literally tunnel vision, like you just focused in and you got it done. And that's all fine and well, but I've carried that through. So if I take on a project or take on a task, I tend to be very honed in and very focused on it until it gets done. And that causes a lot of ripples in the rest of my life. Some other things get pushed by the wayside because you don't think about it at the time. So I thought I need to be more intentional about other areas of my life, family, fitness, health, things like that. I try to, put the time in, living by design instead of living by default. So that's kind of why I thought I need to put a plan together, put a calendar together.
Absolutely. And just with the whole concept of being a dad and being a dad who leads and setting intentions and directing the life where you want to go, it's right on point. So what you said, you dropped into architecture school. I often like to start off asking some questions about your childhood and what drew you into your passion in architecture.
So my father still runs a construction, like building envelope company, very small, but hands-on, roofing, siding, exteriors that he was doing. And I grew up in that world. 10 years old, I was picking up shingles and slates on a roof job for my summers. So that's what I did, a lot of that growing up. Learned the value of hard work, but not the dollar value. He made it very, very clear that he didn't want that life for me. So he made sure to pay me as little as he possibly could to make sure that I didn't get a taste of the roofer's money. Because, in this area, we don't get to do a lot of roofing and exterior work in the wintertime because of the snow.
Right.
So roofers up here make a decent living like when the sun is shining. You know what I mean? And if you're not prepared for that mentally, you can blow that money real fast, and then you are hibernating in the winter or falling into things that just aren't going to pay the bills. So he didn't want that life for me. He wanted more. And on the flip side of that coin, my mother has a bit of an artistic flair. She did some interior design work when she was younger, did a lot of painting. So I had that creative exposure as well as the nuts and bolts of construction. And you kind of put those together and you kind of come up with a very architecture centered mindset. And so I started to pursue that in high school. I was encouraged to, I took like one of those tests of like what your career analysis might be. And it seemed to fall in the CAD architecture drafting world, and actually started a little business in high school with my CAD professor's support, where I was doing some design work of like playhouses for
Oh,
teachers and
nice.
things like that. And then I kind of built that into, I actually built the Adirondack chairs in the mill shop for some of the teachers and the principal. So I've always had a little bit of an entrepreneurial mindset.
Yeah.
And decided I needed to pursue architecture to kind of flex the creative muscles and the tangible. I like to see it kind of that master builder thing. And then it kind of just spiraled from there.
Nice, dude. I love that. And it sounds like you were able to really identify what your passion was, what your skills were, and what you wanted to do to create a work environment, a work style that you enjoy. And often I hear folks like, man, I just want to avoid work. But like when you really enjoy doing what you're doing, it's a different type of feel stepping in. So being in architecture, which school did you end up going to? Did you move away from home? Did you stay close to home? Tell us about that part of your journey.
So I went to Wentworth Institute of Technology right in Boston. So not far from home. I did try the campus living for a little bit, and ended up back in my mother's house. I actually built out her basement so I could have my own little apartment down there when I was finishing school. So I did go for my undergrad in architecture, and then fast forward a few years, I went back for my master's of construction at Wentworth as well, just to kind of round out, because when you're on the architecture path, there's kind of two avenues you can go. You can go architectural engineering, or you can go architectural design. I was less about being able to draw, for lack of a better term, pretty pictures. I always drew boxes, but my boxes would always stand up, right? So there's some value there where, I had that engineering, that logical, that analytical mindset, which made me more prone to the architectural engineering side, where I had to figure out the problem and make it work, as opposed to thinking outside the box and seeing how far I can push that cantilever, or can I get an entire mansion to stand on top of a tree trunk kind of thing.
Wow.
That was not my skill set. So I had to focus on the nuts and bolts, which kind of comes from my father, getting down that road. So, and it was probably the best school in this area. I did consider going to MIT. I think I talked myself out of that just because the prestige nature of it. I was like, I don't think I'm going to be ready for that. And I ended up going to Wentworth, and I don't regret it. It was a great school, and I got a great education and made a lot of connections, and they had a good co-op program. So that's where I kind of launched into my engineering background, where I worked for a building envelope consultant while I was in school, and then continued that after I left and graduated.
Cool. I love that. It sounds like, the path was consistent and is so valuable, especially for us as dads, to see the fostering that both parents were able to do, and helping you find a path that alignment, not just with your passion, but also that could add value to the marketplace. So as you got into this, tell us, like, when did your journey with scheduling and really being intentional and doing scheduling differently than maybe your peers, when did that start?
That's actually a pretty recent development on my end, just because when I reflect back, the past couple of years, I bought my first multifamily in 2009, a short sale, 2-family house hack, and it worked. And I had that grand vision. I went to a couple presentations, like the Real Estate Wealth Annex with Trump and Kiyosaki, and thought, that's my path. I'm going to stick to it. Read Rich Dad Poor Dad, and I thought, this is the path for me. Got that one deal a couple of years after I got exposed to all that, and like the bigger pockets world and everything. And then it fell off. Then I wasn't making the time for it. I was enjoying being a 20-something year old with a house, and being a landlord, and learning the ropes of all that. And then I focused on my relationship with my girlfriend at the time, who later became my wife. And we kind of really focused in on that for a long time, and then got married, had kids, bought another house to move into. And then started to realize that there was something missing. You know what I mean? I could still see that there was more growth potential in me. And I was like, I have to find ways to break that out. And I had heard a lot of like, oh, Sunday planning and miracle morning and all that stuff. And the miracle morning concept, just in the past couple of years, started to pique my interest, but not to the point where I wanted to do the miracle morning. It wasn't to that point where I was like, oh, I want to get up at 4:30 in the morning and have this 3-hour long process where I get ready, because I tend to hit my stride and hit my flow later in the day.
Yeah.
So I wanted to play into that a little bit, not force myself to do something super uncomfortable and hard and heavy, because I knew that in the past, facing that type of stuff, it was easier for me to let go of it. If it was hard, heavy, or I just didn't get much enjoyment out of it, it was easy for me to walk away from it. And then I let my health go because of things like that, and
Mm.
started putting on a lot of weight because of it. And then probably 2 years ago, I got very much more intense. Well, actually 3 years now. It was before the crazy pandemic. I got refocused and re-intentional after running into a buddy of mine locally. Our kids run a soccer team together, and
Nice.
he had done some real estate and he had done flipping, and I was just like, I need to do that. I've been telling people for 20 years I'm going to flip, because my background just seems to play into it.
Yeah.
I have to prove that I can get it done. So we toyed around with partnering. We looked at a couple deals early on in 2019, had a couple really solid offers, had one that was about to stick, and then got smacked with the COVID stuff. And my partner got real nervous about rent payments and didn't want to take on the burden of a 5 family at the start of a pandemic that nobody knew anything about. So
Yeah.
he backed out, and the easy decision then would have been like, oh, well, if he backs out, maybe I should too. But at that point, I decided, no, I want this enough. I need to find a way to get there. So then I started seeking out the coaches, the mentors, the masterminds, to kind of guide me a little bit more, and more of the podcast, more of the books. And I started to hear a lot more about successful people scheduling and meditating. I was totally against meditation, and I started to see the pattern. I mean, you listen to hundreds of these things, and it's like they can't all be wrong. And yes, I would definitely say that they are successful in my eyes. They're definitely many, many steps ahead of where I'm at. And if I want to walk on that same staircase, I need to figure out what step is next. And for me, it
Yeah.
was schedule. Let's try to put some schedule. And I was challenged by one of my coaches to start time blocking. So I did that. I started with chunks of time, because trying to juggle a 40+ hour a week full-time job, family, my health, and trying to grow a business to acquire multifamily property. There's a lot of pieces, a lot of things that could go awry if you didn't focus on them. Too many plates are spinning, and if take your eyes off one for too long, some of them won't bounce back.
Yeah.
So started to resonate a little bit more the more I heard it. I couldn't tell you exactly what that light bulb was, but I slowly started with the time blocking, and then that morphed into very, very strict scheduling of my time. And I failed miserably at it. First day I started trying to schedule, I scheduled myself way too tight. I was like, oh, look at all these time blocks that are here. It was my planners built down into 15-minute increments. I'm like, oh, I can fill all this stuff. And you really have no concept as to how long is it going to take me to build up a direct mail campaign, or do this or do that. These are all things I
Yeah.
had not done before. So I figure, oh, I'll give myself an hour. And then like 3 hours later, I'm like, oh my God, like I've missed all of these other things on my schedule. And again, faced with the decision, do I just give up on this because I'm not cut out for it? Or do I give myself some grace and realize this is my first time trying intentional scheduling? I know what doesn't work. Let's adjust accordingly. So now my schedule, I hit the big stuff. I hit the priorities, but I give myself a lot of buffers in there to deal with the reactionary stuff that I don't have as much control over, especially with a full-time job, where things have to come up, or I need to be there for my family if my wife has to get called away for something. that I know I have to slide in and take care of the kids and get them from point A to point B, or, make sure that they're, fed and put to bed the right way and spend some one-on-one time with them. So, it's still developing. That's for sure. I will never say I'm going to be done adjusting my scheduling and my planning, but it's definitely one of those things where you try it, something doesn't work, make a note of it and adjust accordingly going forward. So definitely, in the past 2-3 years, it's morphed quite a bit.
Yeah, I love that. Nice. So it's been a few years you've been working on it, and you mentioned you start off with time blocking. For somebody that's new to that concept, how did you first start into time blocking and organizing the tasks that you needed to get done?
So it's pretty easy when you look at it from the point of, if you have a full-time job, their expectation is usually that you're there for 8 hours a day, right? So boom, you take 8 hours of your day and you chunk it out, and that's it. You're working your W-2 job. And then it's what do I do with the rest of the day? What do I do when I wake up? How much time do I have from when I wake up to when I actually go to work and I'm in work mode to do something? And what's reasonable to do in that amount of time? Well, that's usually my self time, where it's like, I'll go meditate, I'll spend time with the kids, help maybe get them off to school, or like I just take time for myself, and then I go get my coffee and everything like that, and then I start my day. When I get home, that's when it gets a little trickier, because now you're juggling time with the family, time growing your business, time for yourself, throwing in some exercise if you can. So I just threw some blocks in there. I was like, I'm going to give myself 2 hours when I get home to be with the family, because by the time I get home and the time, my girls go to bed, there's not that much time at the end of the day, typically anyway, especially if I'm out of the house.
Yeah.
And then that's all right. Now that I've, allotted time for the family, now how much time is left for the rest of the night? I can give myself the extra 3 hours maybe, and I'll focus on real estate. And then I'll give myself an hour of just me time, whether it's, unwind, watch a show, or do something that I feel good about. I like to build like little metal earth models and things like that, or
Nice.
build with Lego. I have a Disney castle. It's actually, I'm on vacation this week, and it's in my calendar. I mean, I could show you, it's in my calendar to start building my Disney Lego castle for my girls. And
That's
I
so
already
awesome.
know it's going to take me 6 to 8 hours to do it. So I blocked out some time for it. So, it started with that big chunks of time where you're not too worried about the minute by minute.
Yeah.
And then when I started to see some opportunities, let's say in the middle of the day, where it's like, hey, I'm entitled to lunch break. Why do I have to show that lunch break as work time, right? So if I can technically, legally take that time off to myself, yeah, I can go sit somewhere and eat for an hour and, kill that time that way. Or I can eat and look for real estate listings, or, create some posts on online, or, just work a little bit towards the business on that front. And then it kind of spiraled from there, where I started to find these little areas where I could tack a half hour in, or like an hour in. I have a pretty flexible work schedule based on the fact that I'm a salary and I deal with a lot of chaos. Like I said,
Yeah.
the most recent thing was I was probably 3 weeks in. I had a pipe go on a Class A luxury building in Boston, in the penthouse level, and it wiped out 70 units that are not cheap apartments. And I had to drop everything and get to it. Right. So
Yeah.
I put in a lot of extra hours to make sure that got done. And because of the extra hours I put in situations like that, I find that I can take a little bit of time to myself here or there. If it's like, hey, I have a project in this certain city, but hey, there's also a listing right next door. Maybe I go hit both if I can. And because I've been at my company for long enough, I have a little bit of that flexibility. But it's balancing that to make sure I don't take too much advantage of it. But it's also making it very clear that for what I want in my life, being what they say, golden handcuffed to a W-2 that I love, I'm good at, it may not be the best for me long term. I need to consider what's going to get me those next steps further. And that doesn't necessarily mean leaving my W-2, but it means finding other avenues of revenue, whether it's doing consulting on the side, or I started looking into buying businesses just from my exposure with the GoBundance group. I was like, I had never even thought about it, but it's an option, you know what I mean? So now my mind is, it's like the first day I found Bigger Pockets, all of the different avenues of real estate investing that are out there. And then I walk into this Go Abundance world and it's like, oh my God, like real estate is like that big. And there's all of these other ways to
Yeah,
grow to the life that you want. So a lot of opening, it's that next step. I didn't know it was there until I took those steps before to realize, hey, I'm a little closer and the stuff's starting to come into focus now. Something's out there.
that's cool. And it sounds like it really starts, so you just get back to the time blocking. It starts with just like, hey, all right, I've got 2 hours. These 2 hours I'm going to spend with my family. This hour I'm going to spend myself. And I like that you have like a minimum in your example of an hour, because if you do less than that, it's easy to have something else bleed over and then it's gone. And it seems like, how important is it for you to be consistent with your schedule now as things are blocked out, where obviously you had the example of there's an emergency, there's a pipe burst somewhere, you got to go tackle that. But you have something that it hits that 3 o'clock, I'm going to be done with this and I'm moving to that. How does that transition work for you when you're moving from blocks and you're like, man, I thought I'd have this done in this amount of time and it's not? How do you tackle that obstacle?
It's a constant battle. It's never super easy unless you realize that you're actually filling your time, because it's like, oh, I committed to work on this one project until 3 o'clock and then I'm going to move on. And you end up mentally checking out a little sooner than that, and then it's a lot easier to shift gears. But if you are really in flow, where things are coming easy and it feels light to you, I kind of just ride that out a little bit longer. You know what I mean? I try not to back things up too tight to each other, if I can avoid it, because I know that you don't know when you're going to really hit stride. I have a pretty good sense, which is why you have to have some kind of minimum time block, because to gear up and gear down into different mindsets, different tasks, going from I'm working a full-time job to now I'm in family mode. Well, how do you make sure the work stuff doesn't bleed into that family time, and then it makes your family time not as valuable, right? Or I'm doing family time, but I want to get to the real estate stuff, and it's like, how do you deal with that so that you don't like, hey, sorry kids, I know you're up like a little bit later than normal, but daddy's got to go work now, so I'll see you later. Like, how do you know what I mean? You have to give yourself some grace on that, because the ultimate result isn't that you're trying to hit 100%. Like, I'm not trying to get a grade at the end of the day of, hey, did you get an A today? Did you hit every schedule that was on there? No. How was the quality of my day? You know what I mean? Did I get done the big priorities that I needed to? And do I feel good about the day? And if I don't, make a note of it. If I look back at my schedule and realize, hey, I missed this, then either A, I mistakenly put it as something that was important and urgent, and it wasn't. And that's
Yeah.
on me. I need to adjust that. And I constantly look at that matrix. I think it's from 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, where is it urgent, important, that quadrant
Oh
of,
yeah.
if it's important and urgent, then you got to do it. If it's important but not urgent, schedule it. Like, you'll get it done, but just, it doesn't have to be today's priority. And then if it's not important and not urgent, just stop doing it. Like, it doesn't have to get done. It's not doing anything for you. So I start to look at things like that. I kind of do that more on a weekly basis now, where at the end of the week, I'll reflect on my week before. And when I'm journaling out for my Sunday planning, I have a section of there is, how did last week go? And then I compare, well, of all these things I had lined out, did I do them all? No. Why not? Like, did I make a good alternative decision, or did I find myself looking at my calendar notification that said I need to get on the elliptical right now? And did I look at that and realize, you know what? I'm just too stressed. I don't want to do it. Well, I made an excuse, so I need to pay penalty for that. So I'm going to make sure I get it done the next day, or maybe I prioritize it a little bit more. And it's a mental game with yourself. Like, nobody's going to beat down my door and say, hey, you missed your exercise block that you put in your calendar. It's trying to get yourself comfortable with holding yourself accountable as well.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, if you don't do it, then either you were wrong for putting it in your calendar, or you're falling back into default, where it's like, I'm not that important. I don't have to do that for myself because I just don't feel like it. Now, on the flip side of that, I'll tell you straight through, after dealing with the emergency I was dealing with at work the past couple of weeks, it is very clear, and I've heard this in other books. It's like if I was a video game, I'd have a willpower bar at the top of my screen. Like,
Yeah.
and I have to monitor that because when you're in control of a project like that and you're making so many decisions where every 5 minutes something needs to be done, or you need to direct crews here, there, and everywhere, that takes a lot of your willpower out. And then when you're faced with, hey, you need to be exercising, that's a hard hill to climb. It definitely
Yes.
is. And I don't know, I don't have a magic bullet for that, but I know now that I can identify it. You know what I mean? And now that I know I can identify it, it means that there is a solution. And I just have to work at trying to figure out what that is.
Absolutely. I love that. You touched on your Sunday planning and some journaling that you do as reflection. What are some of the questions that you ask yourself as you're reflecting back on the week before?
So the very first thing I start with is a win from the prior week. That does a lot of things. It helps get your mind right for the planning session that you're about to face down. If you start a session like that in a super negative mindset, then you'll see the impact on your schedule. Like it's weird how the correlation is there, but I've noticed it. That's when I started to shift my planning around, where I have these 5 bullets really that I focus on. And I made sure that focus on my win was the very first thing, so I can start my journaling activity. And it's not like a big journal. It's like a paragraph, maybe, you know
Yeah.
what I mean? Depending on how I feel about the week prior. But I start with that, start with my win. And then I basically go through my metrics. So that's all part of step one, is where's my win? And now compare it to a quantitative metric. I have a list of items that I track on a weekly basis. I use an app on my phone that makes it nice and easy, because again, the easier it is, the more likely you are to do it. Like if I have to
Absolutely.
write down, I had an intention journal and all that stuff, and it required so much thought, so much, like I had to sit down and focus and be ready and be in the right mind space. And I realized that wasn't working for me. So I found an app that's literally just, it's a widget. Click, did I do it or not? Click, did I do it or not?
Nice.
And it's very, very simple. And then I move into the second area, which is now I brain dump. Anything that's on my head, I dump it down.
Mm.
And then I prioritize that list, because I can't do everything on my brain dump, but I have to prioritize 3 to 5 items, because there's 3 to 5 days or 3 to 5 blocks during that week that I have no excuse. I should be able to squeeze one of these items into it and tackle it. And then I wrap up my planning session with a reflection on how did last week go. And now it's time to be honest. Like, I started with the win. I have all this stuff down in front of me. Now, how did it go? Like, do I feel good about it? Like, is there something that's really sticking out that I don't like, or is there something I want to document? And it's like, hey, I feel pretty good about the fact that I just randomly went to Home Depot and picked up a bunch of lumber, and I was in the middle of building my kids a platform for a zip line I put in over the weekend. It's like,
Nice.
I didn't necessarily expect I'd feel great about that, but I didn't have it all worked out. I put it in my calendar to go to Home Depot and grab some stuff, but I didn't realize how good I'd feel about it, because I was just in the zone. I got the
Yeah.
music blaring, and I'm bopping around trying to put a little tree platform together. So it was good. So that's going to go in my journal. It's like, hey, I feel good about that. And then you can call back on those things. You can look back at them and realize, hey, I felt good about these 5 things. So now you can start to figure out, what does your perfect life really look like? Like, if you look at those things you spoke positively about, it means you want more of those things. So what aspect of that did you really like? Now, how do you
Yeah.
build that into your schedule going forward? And then the very last thing I hit on in my planning session is, how am I doing towards my goals? Right. So at the beginning of the year, I set some goals,
Mm.
using things like the one sheet, and just general, like, targets. Right. So behind me, I have a little vision board with a thermometer gauge, because that's what my plan was, is building cash flow. And on that shows the plan. It shows the path to where I wanted to get to. And I look up at that and realize, hey, you know what? I wanted to add 10 doors this year. Did I do it? And I mean, I can honestly say that if I wasn't focused on it the way I was, it wouldn't have been front of mind, and I wouldn't have achieved some of the goals that I did. You know what I mean? But it's reporting in on it to yourself every week helps you hold yourself accountable. And then being like on calls like this and on some of my coaching calls and when I did the scheduling calls, everyone there, like I'm turning all of these people into my accountability partners because they're now looking at me to say, hey, are you doing that? Or how are you doing that? I'm struggling with this. Can you help me? And it's like, well, just in case they run up into something that I haven't run into yet, I have to keep going on this path because there
Yeah.
might be a fork in the road down the street that I don't see yet, but they might get there before me if I'm not consistently on this track. And I want to be able to advise or help them in any way I can. So if I've already run into this fork, then I can be like, hey, I know what you're dealing with. This is what I did. It may not work for you, but just this is my thought process. So you don't feel stranded at a random fork in the road that it's like, all right, I give up. And then you just get off the track and you don't do it anymore.
Yeah. I love that. So it sounds like you're really taking some of that accountability as a leader, knowing that there are other people looking up to you, and that helps you always look to improve your journey as you schedule. So you do your wins for the week, you do a brain dump. How are you doing towards your overall goals, and as well as what made you feel good, or like what were the big overall, how did this week go? And it sounds like all that really lets you reflect and it can brings me back to a really simple principle of our attention goes where awareness flows. And so anytime that you're spending this time really reflecting on your week, reflecting on your planning, I would imagine that's a lot easier as you get into the week to, from even a subconscious level, really commit to the stuff that you're putting down on paper.
Right. And it's easier to then to do like habit stacking with that, right? So you keep that consistency and you know what you're going to be reporting on, and then you kind of rewire a little bit. And it's like, hey, you know what? At the end of the week, I know I'm going to write something like this down. So I started like making random notes because you don't know what's coming down the road for the rest of the week, right? So if on Monday I have a phenomenal day, and then Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday I have horrendous days, by the time Sunday rolls around, I do my planning, I might forget what was good about Monday. You know what I
Mm,
mean? And because of all the noise that filtered in afterwards. So if I found myself like really reflecting back on something, I'm like, I had a really good day today. I just open up my phone and I have like a voice memo app, and I'll just drop in there for a second, be like, hey, today was a really good day. I did this. We walked around here. We, spent some time in Boston and went to a concert and all this stuff. And so I reflect on it so that at the end of the week, I can hopefully call that back, because it wasn't just one day and gone. It was one day, but then I activated other senses by then remembering it at the end of the day and then speaking it into a recorder. And
yeah.
then, some people might turn that into journaling, right? At the end of the day, they might journal really good things. But again, I found that was heavier than me just speaking into my phone. So that's why I chose the speaking into my phone, record that note, and then literally it's like 1 or 2 minutes. And then I'll maybe reflect back on that, because I do my app has voice to text.
Nice.
Voice to text. So as I'm recording my note, it's transcribing it for me,
Ooh,
so that
nice.
when I'm on my Sunday planning session, I just pull up the memo app and I can see some of the key points. And I don't have to listen to the whole thing again, but I know, hey, Boston, Monday, concert, great. I remember it now, it's fresh, and now I can reflect on it.
Yeah, that's huge. Tell us how, one of the things we mentioned off air was your connection with your family, and how this has positively impacted your ability to connect and spend time with them.
Yeah. So as I started back on the intentional like real estate investment journey, I realized I started to slip on some of my other commitments with the family. I wasn't, I was getting that feeling when you walk home. There was definitely a time where as soon as I walk in the door, both my girls come running to me, arms open, and made you feel good. And then it started to dwindle a little bit. I started to realize that I wasn't quite getting that same level of attention. And I talked to my wife about it. And, I was like, I need your help. I need you to be excited to see me when I get home as well, because then the kids will also be happy about it. And she's like, well, we want to, but when you come home as worn out and drawn out as you are at the end of a real busy day, nobody really wants to be around you. And I'm like, I understand that. I can definitely see how that's not a fun spot to be in. So I knew I had work to do on myself. So, I started looking more at that, and then I put into my calendar. I actually sat down with my wife at the end of last year. I tried to kind of do our own little, like there's the one thing, with
Yeah.
Hafizan, and they have their goal setting retreat. And I tried to, because I did an event last October, um, and it really made me think I want to do this. But I didn't want to commit the money and the time away from the kids and all the stuff. So I talked to my wife, and we did our own version,
Nice.
at home. And some of the things we put on there was, I want more one-on-one time. I want to connect with each of my daughters one-on-one, because together they're a different entity. You know what I mean? Like the
Yeah.
two of them together is a whole third person. But my oldest is very logical, very mathematical, scientific. Like I connect on that wavelength with her, and it's amazing seeing it. So when I get the one-on-one time, that shines through, and I get to share with her things that I know that I can get enjoyment out of, and she gets enjoyment out of, and then it becomes valuable, precious time for us. And then my youngest is very passionate. She's very passionate. She loves hard and hurts hard. So
Yeah.
when she's in a really good mood, I mean, there's no one else in the world you want to be around, because she is the most loving human being you've ever met. And then when things don't go right, then it's the opposite. She's like a Tasmanian devil. But you don't get to really bring out the let her express those feelings if you don't give her the space to do it. So, I try to get in one-on-one time with her, and let them decide what they want to do. I mean, one of them likes to walk around the mall, and the other one wants to do crafts. So it's like, okay, that's what we'll do. One-on-one time with daddy, we're going to go walk the mall, or we're going to build a craft. And I used to buy these things called like kiwi crates, little craft sets that I used to get mailed to the house every month, and we used to do little projects,
That's
and
cool.
realize that my oldest was very drawn to it. My youngest was drawn to tearing the boxes apart. So I realized that maybe this isn't an activity for both of us. And that's kind of, the more one-on-one time I was able to spend, I start to see that they're definitely different personalities. And when they're together, that kind of gets lost, right? So that's
Sure.
why I try to make it a point to have my one-on-one time, and I'll put it on the calendar. My wife and I share a calendar, a family calendar, and actually have a TV screen in our hallway leading to the garage, so that if I put something on the calendar right now in our family calendar, it'll pop up there. So that even
That's
if
so
she's not
cool.
looking at her phone, she sees on the calendar that, you know, daddy's taking Kenzie out for Saturday for a few hours, and it's on there. Like that's what my plan is. And then we try to work around that. So now she's using it the same way. Like now we track our kids' activities, their softball game and their rehearsals and stuff like that they're doing. So
That's so cool. How do you have that set up as far as is it in the Google Calendar? And then do you have a monitor? Is it set up to a computer? How do you have that dialed?
So yeah, I have it's called DAC board. It's an online service, and it basically, you can buy it preloaded, or you can just get it and hook it into a computer. But I bought a little preloaded Raspberry Pi computer. It's a little tiny thing, like the size of a deck of cards. And I just went out and bought a cheap monitor from like a Best Buy clearance or something like that. It was like a $50, $60 flat screen monitor.
Yeah.
And I just mounted it to a wall, plugged it into an outlet. And I wanted like real good connectivity, so I re-ran an Ethernet cable so it wasn't using Wi-Fi. But it lights up there, and you go into the online platform and you choose how you want the schedule to look and what calendars you want to sync to it. So at first, I have a bunch of calendars, right? So when I do my planning sessions, I color code everything. So I have a color for my W-2, my full-time job. I have a color for my family, a color for my real estate, and a color for myself. And then there's the mystery color of, I don't know what category this goes into, but I'm just going to have another color. Um,
Nice.
and so I created Gmail, Google calendars for each of those purposes. And for a while, the family calendar looked like my phone, where it had all these colors in there, and it started to be too much noise for the family. So
Yeah.
I realized they don't need to know where I am during the day, when, like, they don't care where I'm at for work. You know what I mean? It has no impact on their day. So I
Right.
started pulling stuff off of the family calendar, um, Now I track it all in my Google Calendar. I have the family, which is a joint email that my wife and I share with the calendar that we both use, and then my real estate, my work, and then my personal time. And I put all those in my personal calendar. And that way, when I have to share something, I'll double block it. So if I had like this, for instance, right? So I put this on my family calendar that, Dan was in his office. So I just put it out there that I'm going to be in my office from this time to this time, so that my wife knows I can't bother him during this time unless there's an emergency, because he's going to be tied up. And then anything else that I'm somewhat fluid and flexible with, I leave it off the family calendar, because it's not that urgent that I focus on it. So I leave
Yeah.
some windows there. But it's a great system, and it updates, refreshes. I do like little inspirational quotes in the morning, so that when the kids get up, they see our picture. We use a slideshow. I put a slideshow on it, so like there's pictures of our trip to Disney that kind of scroll through. And then for my wife's sake, I used to put like little quotes on there that I tap into, and it just kind of auto loads. And then at a certain time, it cuts off and turns into our daily calendar. And then it gives us a screenshot of what's the weather today and for the rest of the week. How's my stocks doing, which is something I probably want to take off of that screen, because that's not, warm and fuzzy most of the time. And it can track all those random things. Like one of the fun things I track is where the International Space Station is.
Cool.
It's
Just
just,
fun
it's a
things that
little,
matter to your
it's,
family.
yeah, it's like a little icon that I put on there. And if the astronaut is green, then the International Space Station is pretty close to directly above our head. So
That's cool. That's cool. And it's important, if you're listening, think of how long, several years, Dan's been on this journey. And you might be hearing all of this new tactical intel of strategies to elevate your scheduling. And it's almost like watching that athlete that's been doing something for years and like, oh, well, that's just what they do. That makes it look easy. But like what you don't see is all the time, and like the journaling and the process of evolving and making it better. So if you can take one thing from this podcast and add it into your routine or start implementing it in, that's going to be a huge win. And just, I encourage everyone to really focus on the journey. And it's not a sexy thing to say, because everybody wants it right now. Everybody wants the results. Everybody wants the quality time and that feeling of like, yeah, I did it. I built that treehouse stand, and I was intentional with my time, and you want it all. And everybody, all of us as men, like we want it all. And knowing that to get there, for us to be those men, it takes a lot of time and willingness to go through struggle. So what would you say, Dan, as we're wrapping up, if someone's starting out and they don't have a schedule, they don't have a journal, their life's a little chaotic, where's a good place for them to start?
I mean, the easiest thing to start with is time blocking, right? You should have a sense where you can at least chunk out your day into what are the categories you want to track against. You know what I mean? Like there's a lot of different categories you can do. Decide what that is. For me, it's basically those 4 buckets, although there's more that you could roll into that. But you have, your work, right? So for me, it's my W-2. And then there's my personal business, which could kind of categorize as finance section, right? Family. And then you got fitness, where, I'm not a fitness junkie. I don't go to the gym and all that stuff, because again, I found that heavy for me. So what's light for me is turn on YouTube and watch like a podcast, or maybe a millionaire case study or something like that while I'm on the elliptical. And then you don't pay attention to the fact that you're on the elliptical, you know what I mean? And then that time goes by, and yeah, you got a half-hour exercise in and you're good. But chunk up your day into categories that are important to you. 4, 5 categories, whatever you want to do. And then look at how many hours you have in the day and what you want to devote to that. You know what I mean? And try it. You cannot give up on it. Give yourself an appropriate window. You know what I mean? For some people, it'll be, give me a week of trying this and I'm stuck. Some people will be, give me a month of this and I'm stuck. I don't know everyone's individual position or how long it takes them to kind of build their own habits. There's all sorts of scientific things out there as to how many times you have to see or do something to make it really stick, but that may not always be true for everyone, depending on what you're putting in. But give yourself an appropriate time. If you can, give yourself a month. that's 4 weeks. That's all you got to do. 4.5 weeks of trying to give it a shot. And if you can't then go back and realize that, all right, I did pretty good, or you can't learn something from that, then you weren't really focused on the right things, maybe. You know what I mean? Don't try to put a bunch of stuff in the family bucket just because you feel that is what is required or expected of you. You know what I mean? Put an appropriate amount of time into that so that you feel the reward that you need. Your family feels that you're present and you're showing up, and that's where you're at. And allow yourself some grace at the end of the week. Understand you may not get an A+ on the assignment, but it's a step further. It's a step closer. So chunk up your day into 4-5 sections, color coded if you have to, and see what you can get done in those times. Like if you give yourself a 2-hour block to do exercise and you get a half hour's worth of exercise done, you gave yourself probably too much time in your time blocking, but you got something accomplished. Now maybe you can shrink down that 2 hours and give an hour and a half back to the family. And maybe that's a good balance, but you're gonna have to tweak it. You don't know how hard to turn that screw until you see what the results are. Can that wheel keep spinning, or did you tighten it too much?
I love that. Don't know how hard to turn the screw until you play with it. You get in. That's a great lesson. And I would just encourage everyone that's out listening to this to know that as you grow, your skill is going to continue to level up. And the more you do it, the better the easier it's going to come.
Yeah. And record it, right? Record it so that I do self audits. So that's why I write this stuff down. And that's why I do certain things that I do, is I can then go back, in a month and just be like, whoa, how far have I gone? And if you've read the gap in the gain, you'll be able to focus on the win. Like, look how far you've actually come. And now that is your fuel to try it again, to move the next step forward, to take the next step on the ladder or the stairs, and just keep at it. Because if you don't measure back to say how far you've already come, then you may keep focusing on that horizon line that you just don't have clarity on, and you give up because you don't know how far away it is. But look back, you can definitely see how far you've already come.
I love that. That's a great thing to end on. Dan, I really appreciate you coming on. What's a good way for people to reach out to you if they want to connect?
I'm mostly on Facebook. You can search me, Dan Milinazzo. I'm also on Instagram. I think it's danmill.rei. So you can find me there. And I got to get more into the social media stuff and make that stuff known. But I definitely spend a lot of time on Facebook, networking in my coaching group, stuff like that. And those are best ways to reach out.
Cool. Well, Dan, thank you so much for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure being a dad. Planning, directing your schedule, directing your life is a huge part of being a leader. And so I'm really grateful that you're able to come on and share your insights and your journey today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.